persevere, I think, is important for everybody. Don't give up, don't give in. There's always an answer to everything. This is a quote by Louie Zamperini, a man who endured so much as a child, as an Air Forceman in World War II, and as a prisoner of war in Japan during World War II. And yet somehow he was able to never give up on himself, and he was able to forgive those who had hurt him so badly. I'll first be talking about Louie's life as a child and his time in the Olympics. Secondly, about his life as a prisoner of war in Japan during World War II. And lastly, about his struggles after coming home from Japan. Now I'll be telling you about Louie's life before being a prisoner of war, including his life as a child in the Olympics and in the U.S. Air Force. Louie Zamperini was born in Olean, New York, and he was raised in Torrance, California. He was the son of Italian immigrants, and he had an older brother named Pete and two younger sisters, Sylvia and Virginia. As a boy, Louie was notorious for being a troublemaker. At the age of 5, he was smoking, and he was drinking by the age of 8. And he would steal anything he could get his hands on from neighbors and storekeepers. Louie's brother Pete was someone Louie really looked up to, and Pete eventually got him to join the school track team. Pete was Louie's life coach, and he trained Louie to become the best 1,500-meter runner at the school, which was how he got the nickname Torrance Tornado. Louie also ran in college and later in the Olympics. During the 1936 Olympics in Berlin, Germany, Louie was one of the youngest distance runner ever to be on the Olympic team, and he was to run the 5,000 meter only after 4 race experience. Although Louie placed 8th in the 5,000 meter Olympic race, he ran one of the fastest laps in the history of the event. He gained recognition from many onlookers, one of them being Adolf Hitler. Hitler asked to see Louie. He shook his hand and he said, "Ah, you're the boy with the fast finish." This information was acquired from Evan Andrews' article, 8 Things You May Not Know About Louie Zamperini, on History Web, published December 17, 2014. Louie was expected to have a great chance of winning gold in the 1,500 at the 1940 Tokyo Olympics, because he would be running at the age of 23 after years of training in the event. However, the Olympics were later canceled due to the outbreak of World War II. As a result of his Olympic dream being temporarily put on hold and the start of World War II, Louie enlisted in the Army Air Corps. He became a B-24 Liberator bombardier on the craft nicknamed Superman, on which he and his crew escaped many near-death experiences. The Liberator B-24s were one of the heaviest planes in the world at the time, and they were very clumsy, making it difficult for them to fly in tight formations that were critical for fighting off attacks. The plane was also plagued with many mechanical difficulties, and if one of the engines quit, then staying airborne was very difficult. Because of the plane's many complications, it was nicknamed the Flying Coffin, and statistics indicate that accidental crashes accounted for the most deaths after deaths that occurred in battle. I got this information from Laura Hillenbrand in the book Unbroken, published by the New York Ransom House 2010 print. Louie and his crew witnessed many of their former Air Force men embark on a mission, and no one ever heard from or saw them again. Louie and his crew were lucky to get their plane to safety as many times as they did, but as the crew headed out on assignment to hunt for another crew that had never landed, 2 of their engines failed and the plane crashed into the Pacific Ocean. Now that I have told you about Louie's life before becoming a prisoner of war, and I will be telling you about Louie's life after his plane crash, floating on the raft in the Pacific Ocean, and his life as a prisoner of war. Only 3 of the 11 men originally on the plane survived the crash: Louie, his good friend and pilot, Phil, and one of the new crew members, Mac. The men survived on the raft for 47 days with few provisions, and they ate fish, told each other stories and asked questions to keep their minds sharp and keep them from going crazy, and fending off sharks that would try to attack them. When the men tried to flag down a plane, They soon realized they were floating towards Japan because the plane started to shoot at them, and it was marked with a red circle. Miraculously, all the men survived the Japanese assault, but Mac later ended up dying on the raft because of extreme dehydration and delusions. Louie and Phil eventually reached the shore of one of the Japanese-controlled Marshall Islands. They had drifted for over 2,000 miles. There they were captured by the Japanese Navy, and Louie was sent to the Japanese mainland, losing contact with Phil. He was imprisoned at 3 different interrogation and POW camps over the next 28 months. During his confinement, he suffered from disease, starvation, and constant beatings and tortures from guards. One guard in particular, Matsuhiro the Bird Watanabe, took exceptional liking to Louie, beating him and threatening to kill him, forcing him to hold a beam over his head with the threat of being shot when he was weak from starvation, and forcing him and other prisoners to punch each other in the face. Louie was also used as propaganda by the Japanese, who knew he was a famous Olympian, and Japanese officials had tried to persuade him into reading messages over the radio as propaganda to try to weaken American morale and make the U.S. government seem incompetent. However, Louie refused to read those messages. The Japanese captors also tried to keep their prisoners naive as to what was going on in the war, but the American planes started bombing Japan, and the captors could no longer hide the fact that the Allies were winning the war. The Japanese officials eventually ceased the torturing of prisoners, and the American planes dropped food, magazines, newspapers, and smokes for the prisoners. The men were eventually taken back to a U.S.-controlled Japanese island to be nursed back to health and fed before being sent back to the U.S. Many of the men were just skin and bones after the long years of starvation, and Louie asked to stay at the island until he gained more weight back so his mom wouldn't have to see him so thin. I also found this from the book Unbroken. Since I first told you about Louie's life being held as a prisoner of war and then his life as a POW, you now need to know about the struggles he experienced after coming home from Japan and the forgiveness of his captors. When Louie arrived back in California, his time in the POW camps and the many times that the bird tortured him came to haunt his dreams. Louie began to suffer from bouts of suffocating anxiety, and it was a struggle every time he was asked to speak in front of audiences about his POW experiences. He had also he had to give up on his dream of ever going to the Olympics again because the years of malnourishment and abuse kept him from being able to resume his career as a runner. He also married a wealthy, impulsive, and fearless Cynthia Applewhite after only 2 weeks of knowing her, and they later had many marital issues when Louie returned to drinking to get rid of his anxiety and stress. His dreams and anxiety took over his life, and he soon became obsessed with the idea of killing the bird. His hatred for the bird began to take over his thoughts and his life. After Cynthia convinced Louie, who was a very unreligious man, to go with her to see a sermon by the evangelical preacher Billy Graham, he felt profound peace. He realized that he was not the worthless, broken, abandoned man that the bird had tried to make him be. The love that his family gave him was what saved him from his feelings of rage, fear, humiliation, and helplessness. He had begun a new life. Louie stopped drinking, and he tried his best to make up for all the mistakes he had made in his marriage. Many of the guards that controlled the POW camps were captured and tried, some of them even executed. But the police who were on the look for the bird could not find him because he had escaped and had gone into hiding. The bird finally came out of hiding in March of 1952 when the arrest order for suspected war criminals had been lifted. Louie went back to Japan to stand before his captors who were held at the Sugamo prison in Tokyo, and he shook hands with and embraced many of his old captors. Louie also ran with the Olympic torch in the 1984 Summer Olympics in Los Angeles, California, and he ran with the torch for the 1998 Winter Olympics in Nagano, Japan, a city not far from the POW camp where he was held during World War II. Before he went to Japan to carry the Olympic torch, Louie wrote a letter of forgiveness to the bird, and CBS contacted the bird to let him know that Louie wanted to see him and to ask him to come see Louie, but the bird refused. Louie didn't let this refusal upset him, and he lived the rest of his life trying to teach others about living a life free of hatred and full of forgiveness, and he always wanted people to live with a goal in mind that you can strive to achieve. This information is according to bio, found in the article Louie Zamperini, Web, published May 29th, 2015. Louie even started a nonprofit camp for lost boys called Victory Boys Camp, where he took in anyone, including one boy that was so ungovernable that Louie had to be deputized by a sheriff to gain custody of him. He took the boys horseback riding, skiing, camping, and fishing, and he let them talk about their troubles. Many of the boys left the camp renewed and reformed, feeling they had a purpose in life. First, I told you about Louie's life as a child in the Olympics. Secondly, about his life as a POW in Japan during World War II. And finally, about his life after coming home from Japan. If there's one thing that I think everyone should learn from Louie Zamperini's life, I would want people to learn that the hardest thing in life is to forgive. Hate is self-destructive. If you hate somebody, you're not hurting the person you hate. You're hurting yourself. It is a healing, actually. It is real healing. Forgiveness.